Hi, I'm Zach Waters, and welcome to another episode of WTF-STOP Photo Talk, where I chat to photographers about their life and connection to the world through photography. John Angerson, born in Bristol, is a British documentary photographer renowned for deep, long-form visual projects. He started his professional career early on in the 1990s, where he covered the fall of the Berlin Wall. He also creates commissioned editorial work for charities, design agencies and media outlets such as The Guardian, The Times, The New York Times, Rolling Stone and Der Spiegel. John is also active in education and public speaking. He currently lectures at several UK universities, where he regularly conducts workshops and lectures. John's had a number of publications, which include Love, Power, Sacrifice, published in 1998 by Dewi Lewis. Love, Power and Sacrifice was a 20-year exploration of the Jesus Fellowship, Jesus Army, offering a detailed observational record of this religious community and its controversies. In 2002, he published Entertaining Angels, which was a photographic documentary project working with St George's Crypt in Leeds. In 2020, he published NASA STS-72 Space Shuttle Mission.
So it suddenly dawned on me that this is a story about a group of men. It's about a kind of band of brothers. And it's also a kind of statement about trust. We're getting a bit deep here now, Zach. Yeah. The fact that they trusted me. I find it hard to believe, I might be wrong, that would ever happen again. That an English kid, I was quite young, would rock up at NASA. NASA would say, "Hello, young man."
We also explored The English Journey, which was published in 2019, which was a documentary project retracing the steps of J.B.Priestley's 1934 book entitled The English Journey, where he travelled around England depicting the economic and social landscapes. We discussed where John's inspiration came from the project.
He talks of England as if it's now, but it was like in 1930. He's got a beautiful way of writing as well. The seed was sown in Bradford. And then 10, 15 years later, I found the book again. I don't know, I was looking for something, found that book. I thought, there's a project in that somehow. So I reread it. Then I applied for a grant, an Arts Council grant, got enough money to actually do it. And then, like I said earlier, I did it. And I decided to do it on 5/4. I decided not to do it like a reportage piece, more of a sort of a slow version of what I normally do. And the first time round was a bit of a disaster. Just the whole thing was a bit of a disaster. I was way too prescriptive.
And we also discussed his relationship with J.B.Priestley.
Was to visualise J.B.Priestley in my car with me.
Yeah.
And I would be showing him what's changed.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I'd find as many things as I could that were kind of they would obviously be in the same vicinity of where he went. Yeah. Within, a couple of miles of where he went. But I was showing him JB, listen, look, this is now what was once a mine is now a series of small businesses in prefabbed buildings, big boxes, metal boxes.
We also discussed his intricate system of marking film canisters before he took them to the lab.
I used to scratch it with my tooth. One stop was one gash. 2 stops was 2 gashes.
You had a code system.
Yeah.
And we delved into his working life and portrait photography with a pretty controversial statement.
I think I'm going to say something quite controversial here. I think there's always this talk about portrait photographer and this notion that it's this collaboration between the viewer and the photographer, and I extract their personality out. I just don't buy that at all. Yeah. My experience is it's usually, right, you've got 5 minutes, yeah? They don't really want to be here. They'll give you what they want. They'll give you a look. And you've got to do your damn bestest to get that look and as much as you can get out of it before they go, have you got enough? Have you got enough? Can we? Are you almost finished? Are you almost finished?
So I was really happy when John found the time to have a chat with me. And the day came and I asked him how his new project was getting on.
It's a long way off, if I'm honest. I haven't quite worked out exactly what the actual project is. I know it's something to do with our relationship with grass. That sounds a bit flaky because at the moment it is a bit flaky, but it's all to do with me trying to access famous bits of English grass and sort of use that as a metaphor for various other things. because I think grass is particularly I've got a slight obsession with Englishness, and I guess that's identity, isn't it? My identity. So yeah, it started. I've got lots in the pipeline. Not much has happened during the winter because obviously grass doesn't grow. I've got quite a few set up for April. It's a long way off though. It's at least a couple of years off, I think.
How are you shooting it?
At the moment, I'm shooting it all on my 5.4, and I've been researching archive stuff. I've spent a bit of time at the Rural Museum here near where I live, in Reading. I've written to the Queen and I tried to get access to the grass of Buckingham Palace. She said no, but I got a quite nice letter back from her. And I've also been tracking down vintage advertising for grass paraphernalia, like grass seeds. I've been in contact with a collector based in Finland who collects old advertising hoardings, interesting painting, sort of like that old sort of 1960s design. Oh yeah, and I've started growing various different types of grass in my greenhouse, although I've realised that grass doesn't like greenhouses. So again, I can't do much till April, because I had a long conversation with a grass grower. I'm going to a grass laboratory in April as well, where they develop grass for football pitches and tennis courts and what have you. And I had a long chat with him, and he said greenhouses aren't the way to go. They have to have air and light, so a greenhouse isn't ideal because it hasn't got a throughput of air. So it's a big learning curve on how to grow grass. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the grass when I've grown it, but I've got lots of different seeds that I've found. I've sourced very odd, like almost extinct types of grass. So you can see I have no idea what I'm doing with it. What I tend to do is make a huge pile of ideas. Some work, some don't work, some are dead ends, some turn into something else. It might metamorphosize into something completely different. It might have nothing to do with grass. But grass is the sort of foundation of the idea, if that makes sense. And then from that I build. Yeah. I'm digging my foundations, basically.
Do you have a working title for the project?
No, not yet. Did I? No. I've read lots of books on grass. The first mention of any plant in the Holy Bible is grass, in Genesis. Verse 7, chapter 1, it mentions grass. It mentions grass seed, actually. So, and there's William Blake, the English poet come visionary. He talks and has a really interesting relationship. Lots of his poetry and lots of his paintings incorporate grass. And I've got a meeting with an academic, a William Blake academic, in a couple of weeks. I'm going to pick his brains about William Blake's relationship with grass. Again, England, grass, painting, who knows? It's all just a load of jumble at the moment.
You've really delved into literature. Is that an important part of your journey as a photographer?
I think the inherent problem with documentary photography is it has a habit of repeating itself, and it has a habit of visually repeating itself, and content-wise, you see pictures that it's like one big sort of circle of imagery and ideas. So I've been really conscious to sort of mix it up a little bit and try not reinvent it. It's to sort of play around with it a little bit and see where it might go. Yeah. Add extra elements, extra layers of ideas, and extra layers of visuals and artifacts and archive. Whatever interests me, I try and layer it on top.
It's an interesting link as well. So your current project is about the English obsession with grass, and now it's becoming your obsession with grass.
I think, if I'm honest, it all stemmed from an English journey picture I did of the turf at Anfield in Liverpool Football Club. And that picture somehow keeps, whenever I see it, I always think there's something interesting going on there. The fact it's just a piece of grass and it says so much without it being too clever. I'm quite interested in the fact that pictures don't necessarily have to shout at you. And if you spend a bit of time with, particularly, for example, English Journey, I'm pretty sure a lot of people that have seen that work kind of go, what? It doesn't instantly gratify visually.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who've spent a bit of time with it kind of understand where I'm coming from and kind of get the vibe, get the concept's a horrible word. And then they suddenly hook into where I'm going with it. It's a slow burn. It's a slow burn way of doing things. They're not epic, sort of traditional documentary photographs that we've all seen and love. They're a kind of my version of it, if that makes sense. It makes you kind of quietly think about what is going on here.
What would you say is a traditional?
It's often in black and white. It's often it's often of people. It's often fairly close up. it's often sort of wide in inverted commas, wide, as in you see a lot of information.
Yeah.
And quite often it's of something that isn't necessarily positive.
Yeah.
I did a book on a religious cult at the very beginning of my career, and it was all those things I mentioned. It was black and white. I spent years embedding myself with the community. Yeah. And after I'd finished that book and that project, I kind of had a sort of wake-up call and thought, I've got to not do this again. I found myself going down that road again, thinking, I'll do another one of something else, I'll shoot it. In that sort of traditional sense, traditional approach, that traditional journey of making work. And I thought, no, I can't do that because it will just look the same and it won't challenge me. I'll continue being in my comfort zone. I've got to abandon all known methods. Yeah. And at the time, when I went from that end of that project into the English Journey project, it must have been at least 4 or 5 years where I didn't actually show any work. I made tons of mistakes. I hadn't got a clue how to use a 5.4 camera. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing, really, because it was like a whole new journey. The English Journey, I'm not sure if anyone knows this, I actually did it. I was meant to do it in one go. I ended up doing it like 3 times. The first time round, it was just really boring. The second time round, technically it was poor. And the third time round, I kind of worked out what I was doing. To be fair, some of the images I took on the first go and the second go kind of made it into the final book. Yeah. But the third time round, I basically worked out how I was going to do it. And I felt confident in what I was doing. And so this next project I'm working on now, I'm trying to abandon all the things I've learned from the second one.
But isn't that what it's all about? Can we go back to how John Angerson became a photographer?
I was born in Bristol. My mum was a teacher. And my father was, he worked setting up common ownership companies that were run by the workers. He sort of went all over the world sort of helping people create common ownership companies. And then we left there when I was about 5, and we moved to the beautiful town of Northampton. My dad was, I wouldn't say he was a photographer, but he always had a Super 8 camera, and he always had cameras about. He had a sort of like Rolleiflex copy. He had like a little Rolly 35mm. So I remember one day he saw an advert in our local paper for like for sale, a camera. And by pure chance, I remember going with my dad to this man's house, knocking on his door. And it transpired this guy was a retired portrait photographer, a quite well-known Northamptonian who had a little photography business. And he was selling all his cameras. He was in his 80s. And I think he saw that I was so interested in the whole thing. And I was asking all these questions. And he said, I think the camera was like £20 or something, £25. And he said, here's a roll of film, go and shoot some pictures. This is how you use the camera. And then come back and I'll process it for you. He had a dark room in his back, at the bottom of his garden. So I rode my bike, I shot some pictures of my brother and sister, mucking around in the garden. I went back to this guy's house, dropped off the film, and then he said, come back in a few days and I'll show you the negatives. And then he showed me the negatives and he goes, this one really worked, this one you didn't close down the aperture. Blah, blah, blah. He says, come into the dark room, we'll print one. That was it. I went into this guy's dark room. It was red light. And this old boy got his sort of like Agfa record rapid paper out. Yeah. And did this massive print. And I just thought, wow, this is something else. And I was 14, I think. 14. That was it. Next birthday, I went and bought myself chemicals and some photographic paper and started doing photograms in my cupboard. I took my camera in a few times to school, and then one afternoon a Sea King helicopter, bizarre, I don't know why, had come to our school to demonstrate, probably to make people join the army, and it landed on our playing field. And I remember taking a photograph of it outside from the art room window. The idea into my head thought, I reckon the local paper might be interested in this. So after school I persuaded my mum to let me ride my bike into town. Went to the local newspaper, went to reception, and I said, I've got a photograph I think you might want. Next thing I know, the sort of picture editor came down, a guy called Keith Price, he was called. And he says, come up, lad, come up. And then I walked into the dark room, and then some darkroom guy took the film off me. I remember them sort of printing it wet, whacked it in the enlarger. The picture came out, and he goes, you've just sold yourself a picture there, son. And I think he paid me like 24 quid for this, and it was used on page 5. Seeking helicopter comes to Northampton School for Boys. And I thought, hold on a sec, I've just made 20. You can imagine when you're 13, 14, 15, making 24 quid. It's like, I made the big time. And every time I heard of something interesting, I'd go off from a camera, go back to the Chronicle and Echo, and they would either pay me. Well, they used to pay me and give me film and paper as well. Every time I went, they'd give me a box of like 50 HP5s. The big square boxes you used to get.
Yeah, but that was the practice then.
Yeah.
When you went to do a shoot for an editorial client, you would get the film.
Yeah, they used to sort of like, it was like, I think people forget that there was no digital. So film was almost like salt or sugar. It was like a commodity. It was just, here you go, here's some film, and they'd give you 50 rolls of Tri-X or whatever.
Were you at that time aware of the outside world? Because what year was this? What year was this roughly?
This would have been 1987, 1988.
At that time, there was a really big English photography scene, wasn't there? Were you aware of what was going on in the outside world?
Not really. I remember finding a Bill Brandt book in the school library and thinking, oh, I see, people actually do take pictures and make books and publish stuff. And then I think I saw the Don McCullum work in the Sunday Times magazine. I remember just seeing the Sunday Times magazine thinking, oh, I see, they take pictures and they go, oh, wow. It was all quite naive. But when I left school, I sort of flunked everything, more or less. Yeah. And then there was no photography courses in those days. Well, there was, but there was very few photography courses. There was, dotted around England. So I ended up doing a graphic design course at Northampton School of Art. My photography tutor had this guy, one of his friends put an exhibition up in our corridor of our college. It was a guy called Tom Wood, and he'd done an exhibition called Looking for Love. I remember walking through the corridor, seeing these big colour prints, thinking, oh my God, I was transported into this world of Liverpool nightclubs and the colour and the sweat, and I just thought, this is it. I found it. I found what, it was like, that was it. And then my tutor at college kind of guided me a bit. He was more of a kind of fashion photographer.
Yeah.
I don't think he was that into what I was doing, but at this point I'd been to the local record shop actually, and outside the local record shop was this group of, they were called the Jesus Army. They were all dressed in fatigue and they were trying to get people to go to one of their events. And I remember just bucking up the courage and saying, oh hi, I'm at college, I'm doing a graphic course, but I'm really into photography, can I come to one of your events? And they said, yeah, that should be fine, So I then, the following day, I didn't tell my parents because I thought they're going to think I've lost it. I remember going with my mate Damon. He could drive a car. So in his mum's mini metro, we drove because I'm waiting here, mate, I'm not going in there. And I walked in and it was full of maybe 300 people, all speaking in tongues and shouting about Jesus and collapsing with euphoria of Jesus. I thought, oh my God, what have I walked into here? This is unbelievably good photographs. And somewhere along the line, I realised that I shouldn't rush it. I think at an early age, I must have been, at this point, I must have been about 17. Interestingly, one of the images I took on that day made the book. It's still an image that whenever I do lectures or anything, I show people that image and say, remember, what you take now, you never know how good or bad it is. It might be the defining image of your career. I just remember responding. Do you know what I mean? I didn't consciously think, oh, there's a photograph. I just was so young, and I'm sure you're the same, Zach. Sometimes some of your best pictures don't even remember taking them.
Absolutely.
Yet they just appear, they're sort of like given to you, and then you get back, or years later, or you look at the negative. And quite often I found there's only ever one negative of it, or one file of it, or whatever it is. Does that make sense? There's not, very rarely do you get a winner and there's like a whole series of them. There's usually just one sort of amongst other crap. Does that make sense? You've got image, and then one absolute bell ringer, and then a load of crap afterwards. I think that's the case with a lot of my sort of favourite or most impactful images.
Yeah.
They're out on their own. They're just sort of sitting there going, hello.
Just going back slightly, what was the Tom woodwork on the wall?
It was his looking for love stuff.
Right, okay. Was that a turning point where you started realising there was bigger narratives within taking pictures?
I'd like to say a spotty 17-year-old kid in that corridor went, "Oh, I understand narrative. I understand it." No, I just went. It was more naive than that.
Yeah.
I just went, "Whoa, look at these! Aren't these amazing?" Does that make sense? I don't think I had any consciousness of it. It was just there. It was just. I don't think I even remembered the guy's name. I just thought, how has he done this? I think I was transported into a world that I'd never seen, you know. A provincial boy from Northampton transported into a nightclub in Liverpool, and shot in colour and beautifully shot as well, you know, really, really kind of like intimate. I think, I'd like to say that was the pivotal moment that I found my calling. But the truth is, I was 17, I didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't got a clue. I just went, wow, these are cool.
Was Jesus Army the first thing you thought, I can create a story here and it's going to take me on an adventure?
Yeah. Well, again, naively, I just knew that when I went there, I felt something. I felt a connection with these people. I think there's an important thing. I'll come on to that. There's an important thing that I've only in the last couple of years realised why that is. I grew up as a Quaker. So as a kid, my grandfather and my father were Quakers. So my experience of religion was every Sunday walking into the meeting house, as we called it, and sitting in silence. Yeah. And then the kids would go in for the first 10 minutes in silence. And then 10 minutes in, usually, the children would go out into another room and we'd do some sort of Quaker activity, ban the bomb flags, talking about, you know, how we can stop wars, you know, oppression of other people, that kind of thing. So my concept of religion was silence. And then I walk into a sort of commune, I hate to use the word cult, but it's kind of cult-like experience. I suddenly thought, oh my God, this is a different religion to what I'm used to. And I suddenly, and visually, you can imagine visually, you know, they're all in khakis as well. They're all in sort of army fatigues. And that drew me in, I think. Wow, I thought, this is something else. It's not what I'm used to. I was being nosy and inquisitive and sort of educating myself because it was so alien to me. There is a caveat to the Jesus Army, which we can maybe come on to another towards the end or something, but it's all gone sour. Not with me, with them, but they've gone sour. It's now been completely closed down. They've got all these community houses worth millions of pounds because they all lived in shared housing. There was abuse, basically. I didn't see any. I never witnessed anything, obviously. But Channel 4 are in the process of making quite an in-depth, long-form documentary on it, of which I'm involved in some ways. Because I've got, from the period where it was happening, I was there. Yeah. So I've got like this archive of images, the group as it developed. If I'm really honest, now I look back, I didn't see or feel anything, but there were moments where I thought, this is something weird going on here. But that, again, it's all going to court, so I probably best not say anything. I'm not going to court, but it's going to court, so I probably should not say much about that. I've put a kind of announcement on my website about what has happened. So again, you have no idea. Yeah. You have no idea what that it sort of perfectly makes me come back. The image that I took at the beginning, I say, is like, you never know when you're going to take your best picture, and you never know. Like, if I'm really honest, when that book came out, a lot of magazines and newspapers, like the Sunday Times magazine, were all set to do a big piece on it. And then they bottled it because they thought, this is... I remember the quote, he said, "I love the work. I think it's a great piece. It's a bit of a hot potato. We can't run it." People, particularly in the UK, in a sort of secular society, people are a little bit adverse to religion. I remember the guy, Dewi Lewis, who published it, I remember him saying to me, religion's a hard sell. And I think he was right. But now the project's become something else, Yeah. It's become something that will, at the time I had no idea, it's become a sort of hate to use the word, it's sort of evidence of a time that we will never see again.
I think the style of the project was a sign of the times as well.
Totally.
In what was happening in the 90s. Berlin You were there for the fall of the Berlin Wall. And does that link in with your awards for you won Ilford Young Photography?
Yeah, that was what won me the So 1990, by which point I'd finished the design course, and I got all the paper. Keith Price again, the picture editor. He said, "How do you fancy doing 3 days a week for us? But you're doing nights." So I'd start at 3. I think I start at 3, and I have to do all the sort of Cub Scout check presentations. Yeah, everything that nobody in the day wanted to do. Then I have to do the night football matches, and then I'd have to be on call through the night until 9 o'clock the next morning. So fires, car crashes.
Night is another technical thing as well, isn't it? Because you're thinking, what flash kit did you have? Mets?
Yeah, I had a Mets. I had a 60 and a 45. Still got the 45.
CT version.
Yeah.
Oh, they were big, weren't they? How many battery packs did you have?
Yeah, a bag of them. And those batteries never worked, did they? They were always rechargeable, that never worked.
There, we were bane of my life. And the wires as well. All them wires.
And people forget that, I won't get into techie. People forget we had to you had to work it out. You had to think, right, they're that far away. It was all done in your head, wasn't it? It was you did the calculation.
I think if you've had the Met CT series, you never forget anything about that period. So, how did you get the book published with Dewi Lewis? How did that come about?
I was living up in Yorkshire. We've sort of jumped a bit, but I was living up in Yorkshire, and somebody in Manchester saw some of the prints and said, "You should show this to Dewi." So I did. And after, maybe 6 months of messing around with how it might work, we went and published it. Bear in mind, at this point, it was like I'd been doing it for probably 10 years. When I say doing it for 10 years, I had periods where I didn't do it,
Yeah.
I would just keep popping back and adding stuff to it. And if they contacted me and said, "Oh, we've got a wedding next week, do you want to come to a wedding?" I go, "Oh yeah." "Oh, we've got a funeral, do you want to come to a funeral?"
Yeah.
And then one of them went, "Oh, I'm having a baby, can you come and photograph? They're in hospital, can you come and photograph our baby in hospital?" Do you see what I mean? It was like, but that over a period of like 10 years, it was quite bitty towards the end.
So the 90s was a massive learning curve for you. It was your grounding. You say you accidentally did a book. How did you get that first book?
I think the contact in Manchester, I can't remember who it was. It was some sort of photography kind of group in Manchester. So I think I rang him or emailed him, probably one of the two.
Yeah.
And said, "Oh, hi. I'm trying to think who it was. I can't remember the guy's name. Blah, blah at Manchester Photography Group said I should show you this." Yeah. And he said, "Oh, yeah. How about next Thursday? Pop over, show me it." So I literally went to his house and showed him it. And then it sort of like went on from there, really. I think he saw that there was potential in it. I think he could see that I'd put the hours in as such. The hardest thing, I think, was editing it, because there was so much stuff. And a lot of it was samey, if that makes sense. There was lots of like people with their arms in the air, collapsing, and hardly any intimacy. And the intimacy was the hardest thing to get, because it was, trying to get in when they weren't having a big sing-song.
The 90s obviously was your branding. What changed in these eras? How did you evolve as a photographer?
I worked for the local paper, and then after about 2 years, I got a job up at a picture agency up in Yorkshire, doing stuff for the Guardian, the Telegraph, covering like Manchester, Leeds. We went as far as sometimes went to Edinburgh and stuff, We covered that whole kind of region at the top.
Was that the Gazillion?
Yeah. It was Gazillion. It was mostly broadsheet stuff, all sorts of stuff we did, but mostly broadsheet. So I did that for probably about 6 or 7 years. And then I got a sort of lucky break with the Saturday magazine of the Times. Again, a kind of fluke, really. I think they got confused where I was based. They rang up and said, "Oh, can you do this?" It was something to do with some unusual school that were doing... They did like meditation at the beginning of the lessons and stuff. It was like this sort of like new world school, not new world, new well-being. That's it. That's the word I'm looking for. A well-being school. So I did all these pictures, and I think it was something like Stafford, something like that. So then they started giving me all these jobs sort of near Stafford. Oh, John's near Stafford. Didn't live anywhere near it. And then they sent me to America a few times. And then I was sort of the go-to man for sort of reportage stories.
Yeah.
Then I started working with this one journalist called Robert Crampton. So we sort of became this sort of team. So if they ever had like a strange human interest story, or, you know, this is like 2002 onwards.
Yeah.
Anything like slightly odd, they'd send me and Robert. So we ended up having this sort of like, I don't know, probably about 10 years together, 8 or 10 years of just literally going to the most bizarre things, doing the most bizarre places. I'd spent a lot of time editorially trying to master shooting colour transparency.
Right.
I set in my head when I first started at Gazillion that if they asked for something in colour, I wouldn't shoot it on colour neg. I would shoot it on colour transparency. So I basically, whenever I could, I was practicing how to get things right on colour transparency. And obviously the Saturday magazines all liked the idea of colour transparency because that was what they did. Mm-hmm. So when they saw my portfolio, it was back in the days when you remember you used to send like those big blackboards of dupes. You'd get your 35 mils dupe to 5.4. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So they asked for my portfolio, so I sent in my sort of big black boards. It's hard to explain on a podcast, but they were big A3 boards with your portfolio as 5x4 trannies. Yeah, but they were from 35 mil. So I think they could see that I could shoot colour. And when I sent the jobs in, I remember the picture editor saying, "You know how to shoot colour, don't you? There'll be plenty of work for you." Does that make sense? So I think they just knew they could rely on me to get colour trannies to them all the time in decent quality.
It was a very difficult format to master.
Yeah,
for the transparency.
it was an utter nightmare. But once you'd got your head around it, understanding that certain colours reflect,
colour casts.
Colour cast, that was one issue. Then you had the other issue with, for example, if you're shooting something and it's got loads of white or yellow or something in it, whatever your meter says or whatever you think it says, you've got to compensate even more. Yeah. And all that push-pulling when you go to the lab, you can clean up your highlights, you can, I found, using high-speed transparency was a waste of time. You were better off pushing low speed a little bit, if that makes sense.
It very much does.
Yeah.
I think just even using a different type of film, didn't the Fuji have like a sort of chunky green to it, like this was sort of underlining green? Yeah. And I remember in the Kodak had this, I can't remember off the top of my head, they put with like the warm tone, and it was a really massive part of my learning E6. And I remember being an assistant watching photographers, the amount of gels they used to take, and magenta and cyan gels and stuff.
I just remember having like a separate bag with a filtration system, so you rock up somewhere and you have to sort of filter for the light with colour meters and all sorts.
Did you feel when you were shooting transparency that you had to sort of give in to some sort of colour cast on it and say, right, you've got your flash obviously, which you can blue it out and get the nice daylight balance, but there was always something. I always said, well, I'm going to accept certain colour cast changes with that, and I'm going to go with that. Yeah. Rather than fighting to get a pure sort of finish. And I think when you're shooting editorial as well, you're shooting quite low shutter speeds sometimes, and to get the ambience, and that would sometimes bring in a yellow from the lights, the ambient lighting and stuff. So I had to sort of say, well, I'm going to accept there will be some yellow in this. The flash will take away some of the horrible casts. And I think it was about accepting a way of working within transparency.
I do remember using a tripod a lot more. I remember I had like this little, I've still got it actually, like a little travel gitso that I had. And I remember using that all the time.
Yeah.
So instead of using flash sometimes, I'd just be on a tripod hoping for the best. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, sitting by going to the E6 lab and just sitting there praying that something would come out.
Oh, the night
or occasionally
metro or something like that.
Or sometimes you'd run a roll and say, oh, please, just run this first. Yeah, run this test one through. Please, put it through at plus a third, see what happens. Then he'd get it out and you go, oh, bollocks. I'm sorry, I shouldn't swear. Oh, damn, I got it wrong. Put it through at +1, see what happens.
You had to have a good pen, didn't you? I remember looking at a few E6s and going, I forgot what to write on them.
No,
I
used to scratch it with my tooth. One stop was one gash, 2 stops was 2 gashes.
Ah, you had a code system.
Yeah.
Do you remember when there was that transition between everybody sort of accepting colour neg, and I remember early 2000s where we could start scanning neg, so we could leave transparency behind. The liberation and the freedom of shooting colour neg for me.
I just found shooting 35mm colour neg never really, that early colour neg, you know, that sort of Fuji, Supra or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
I always just never got on with it. It always looked really horrible and orange and grainy and yuck, dirty. It was like, and so that's why I kind of carried on shooting transparent. I used to get told off sometimes. Why have you sent us E6? We can't process it. You know, I've had that so many. I remember doing a Telegraph like, you know, features job, and I sent them loads of 120. I shot it all on a Hasselblad, and they went absolutely bonkers at me. Why have you sent it? Oh, we can't process it.
Times were changing because
and I was still like sort of experimenting with medium format, you know.
Yeah, no, I just remember colour neg. I could shoot in the dark and not worry about it anymore. And for me, it was really accessible, and I didn't have to worry. I could put my lights away, I could put my flash down, and I could use ambient light again. And you know, it was just a wonderful feeling. And that transition, do you remember the transition from sort of when digital was being forced upon us, and we having to sort of then, and budgets were changing?
I held on as long as I could. I held on. I don't think I didn't want to. I don't know if you remember some of those early digital cameras. It just didn't work. They were really hard to use. The focusing on them was really hard. I had like a Nikon D100 or something, was it? The early, you know, the first generation. I think I had a D2 or something.
I refused to go Nikon when it changed.
Yeah, no, in the end I sold all my Nikons and went Canon because Nikons were rubbish.
They were going, what, the third frame or quarter frame or something like that?
They were.
And
right.
I refused, and I was sold by the Kodak Pro. And the Kodak Pro I could use my normal Nikon lenses for it. Yeah. And it cost me £6,000 or something. It was the worst thing I've ever bought. I remember getting it, and the processing, you take 1-2 shots running. You had to wait like 3 minutes before you could take the third one. So, as you can imagine, it's ideal in a 5-minute shoot. And I remember almost in tears thinking, I've spent £6,000 on this kit. Something like that. It was that much at the time. Yeah. And I remember working till I paid it back, and then I just threw it in the bin. And then I had to sort of start getting into the Nikon. I just wanted to stay with Nikon. But I remember shooting a job and pretending I was shooting digital, but I was shooting neg because I couldn't rely on my Kodak.
Yeah. I remember the Times magazine, literally, it was going that way. And I remember an email coming through, and it sort of basically said, as of next week, we will no longer be accepting film. No one was warned. It was just said, that's it, no more. So that week I had to go and I went and bought myself a Phase 1 back from a Hasselblad. Cost me $8,500.
Wow.
I've still got it actually. I think it's a fantastic, because it's a really old chip.
Yeah.
Okay, it's got its limitations. You can't go above 200 ASA, maybe 400 ISO rather. Yeah. But there's something about it. I do quite a lot of, you know, artifact copying of it with it. There's something still really beautiful about it. It looks like a roll of film a lot of the time. It's got a really neutral colour balance. It's a Phase 1. It connects onto the back of my V Hasselblad. I still use it, you know, at least, once or twice a month. I very rarely use it on a proper job because it's a bit clunky, and it's really, you know, I'm used to autofocus now for commercial work. But yeah, anyway.
Well, everybody's into expired film now. Why? What's wrong with using expired old backs? Old digital backs. So at the time when you were doing, just previous, going back a little bit again, is when you were doing the Jesus Army and stuff, you were getting commissions and you're shooting black and white, and I presume that's how your NASA project came about.
Yeah. Again, the NASA project, the majority of the material I shot for that was in colour transparency.
Yeah.
But I had a sort of B camera rolling, kind of for myself. So the pictures that are in the NASA book are basically the B-roll. And that sort of kind of comes back to what we were saying. During lockdown, I went back over the negatives. I'm sure you'll kind of resonate with this. When you look at some work 20 years later, it's almost like it wasn't you photographing it. You have no memory whatsoever of taking anything. Yeah, you remember being there, but you don't have that connection. Like, if you went and photographed something today and you edited it on Monday, you're connected to it. You remember what happened. You remember how the chain of events happened. Yeah. With the astronauts, I went back. I got all the negatives out. Probably about 30 or 40 rolls of film, and I suddenly started seeing pictures that I'd never printed, and I don't quite know why. It's because I probably had that memory connection with them, as in, oh, that didn't quite work because that was doing, this one's a better picture. So a lot of the stuff in the book was stuff that I had never printed. So it suddenly dawned on me that this is a story about a group of men. It's about a kind of band of brothers. And it's also a kind of statement about trust. We're getting a bit deep here now, Zach. Yeah. The fact that they trusted me. I find it hard to believe, I might be wrong, that would ever happen again. That an English kid, I was quite young, would rock up at NASA. NASA would say, hello, young man. There is a bit of a backstory to it. Channel 4 were doing a film. They were doing a kind of old-fashioned documentary where there was no script. They gave enough budget for them to go there for a year and film what happened. The moment the astronaut found out he was going to be an astronaut to the moment he went up into space. Yeah? I'm sure people now know that a lot of the documentaries you see on TV now, there's kind of, the story is told, they're told what the story needs to be. Does that make sense? You're making a documentary about X, we need to see X, Y and Z. This was in the years, this is the back end of documentary filmmaking. So I was basically brought in as the stills guy, but because he was shooting in a sort of cinema verite way, I couldn't actually be there when he was filming. So I was always 10 minutes behind him, if you know what I mean. So he'd film a scene and I'd sort of like mop up when he'd moved towards something else. So if he was filming an astronaut over there, I was filming the astronaut. So I had a unique opportunity to be embedded in a group of men. I just find it hard to believe that would still happen.
I don't. I think obviously NASA's a mega thing to be able to walk into, but I think it's a sign of the times. I remember I was at college, and my college in Sunderland was opposite the Montgomery Colliery, and I was looking for an idea to go and photograph, and I thought, I'm going to take pictures of coal miners. So I literally walked over the road, went to the manager's office, and literally knocked on his door and said, I'm a student over there, can I come take pictures of the coal mine? And he went, yeah, all right, when do you want to do it? So I think in the 90s era was a different world. You wouldn't be able to do it now, and I doubt you'd be able to walk into NASA and
I think there was a trust. I think particularly in America as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've had this. I just remember there was if you rock, for example, when I was at the Chronicle Echo, the local paper in Northampton, if you rocked up a lot of places to photograph whatever, there was they were flattered that you turned up. Yeah. There was like an honour. Oh my goodness, the man from the Chronicle Echo's here. Yeah. And the same with NASA. There was someone's interested. A filmmaker or a photographer is interested in us. Yeah. There was a naivety, if that almost makes sense. There was no control over us. There obviously was control over us, but not in the way now. It would all be managed. It would be a completely different experience. And not forgetting one important fact is they were naive too, and I was naive. I didn't really realise until now, when I look back at it, how I did it. Yes. How did I wing that one? How on earth did I wing? It wasn't through my ability as being a schmoozer or anything. Do you see what I mean? It was just like a series of events that happened. I met someone on a job. They were from Yorkshire. I was living in Yorkshire. We got on well. They said to me in passing, we're making a film. We might need a photographer. I get a phone call. Are you free next week to go to America to do this astronaut thing? We'll be away for 6 weeks. Are you in? We'll pay you very little. Yeah? I went, yeah, I'm in. Do you see what I mean? It wasn't through... Absolutely. It was a series of sort of happy coincidences, Yeah,
and that's it was a pretty mega thing. Even just getting 6 weeks commission is an amazing thing. Yeah. So in your next party journey, did the English journey then, was that the next stage in your storytelling?
Yeah, I think so. The English journey was something that started when I first moved to Yorkshire. So I don't know if any of the listeners, or you remember the photography museum in Bradford. There's a big photography and film museum. And outside the photography museum is a big statue of a guy in a coat with a beard who's their famous son, J.B.Priestley, who was like this sort of left-wing writer from the 1930s. And he wrote a book called English Journey. And I remember going to the local library, finding a copy of English Journey, reading it, and then a few weeks later finding a first edition in a second-hand shop in Bradford. And I read this book and I just thought, oh my God, this book feels like it was written now. It's like so contemporary. He talks about, the plight of the workers, the fact, it's like reading. I implore everyone who gets a chance is read it, because you'll be, he talks of England as if it's now, but it was like in 1930. He's got a beautiful way of writing as well. The seed was sown in Bradford, and then 10, 15 years later, I found the book again. I don't know, I was looking for something, found that book. I thought, there's a project in that somehow. So I reread it. Then I applied for a grant, an Arts Council grant, got enough money to actually do it. And then, like I said earlier, I did it. And I decided to do it on 5/4. I decided not to do it like a reportage piece, more of a sort of a slow version of what I normally do. And the first time round was a bit of a disaster. Just the whole thing was a bit of a disaster. I was way too prescriptive. I'd read a section in the book and I'd go to that bit in the book, if that makes sense, and kind of photograph that particular thing. And I ended up with a series of pictures that looked really, really almost like a local history project. Does that make sense? By the third time round, I realised the way to do it was to visualise, this sounds a bit odd, but was to visualise J.B.Priestley in my car with me.
Yeah.
And I would be showing him what's changed.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I'd find as many things as I could that were kind of they would obviously be in the same vicinity of where he went. Yeah. Within, a couple of miles of where he went. But I was showing him like, JB, listen, look, this is now what was once a mine is now a series of small businesses in prefabbed buildings, like, big boxes, metal boxes. Where there was once a beautiful hotel, it's now a call centre. Do you know what I mean? Those, the roads you went on, they're motorways now, and there's motorway services. Look at these places. Does that make sense? So it was like, it was my English journey, and J.B.Priestley was my passenger. Whereas before, the first time I went, I was the passenger, and J.B.Priestley was showing me. Does that make sense? But it took me one go round to realise that the relationship was wrong. It was the one way round. I was driving, not him. Does that
yeah, your visuals are there's a mix of your visuals. They're very layered. They're very abstract. They're very quiet in some places. And it's almost like an abstract snippet of time. You're not trying to say too much. You're just saying, this is it. This is what it is. This is a person behind a desk. This is a field with an agricultural field. And this is the route through a town. It's a very surreal approach, I found, in a way, and I'm trying.
It's almost like it's like a classic road journey. It's a road trip.
Yeah.
It's an English road trip. I think it's a road trip.
It's very quiet, though, isn't it?
But
it's quiet, sort of surreal.
It's not ever going to be epic, as in epic visuals, because England isn't epic. I don't think. I don't think you very rarely see those sort of. The sort of images I'm thinking. When you see sort of images of like the Rockies or Death Valley or those sort of places, they always look kind of quite epic in their visuals.
Yeah.
Where in my experience, unless you go to maybe Scotland or Dartmoor or something, the majority of England is usually quite flat. It's usually quite dull, as in light-wise, and it's usually quite flat. Mm-hmm. As in visually flat, not flat as in flat light. I kind of really wanted to embrace that and not fight it. I started off by wanting it to look, really epic. These are beautiful, epic images of England. Mm-hmm. Whereas I suddenly dawned on me that unless I'm doing something wrong, most of the time, England doesn't look epic. As in that traditional kind of almost visual cliche of what a landscape could look like,
Yeah.
Rolling skies, beautiful shafts of light, a rock in the foreground, everything in focus. The majority of time, it's like a housing estate,
Mundane.
It's but it isn't mundane. The mundane is the beauty, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And
yeah. But you've got me, yeah.
I think sometimes when you talk about the kind of images you were sort of comparing them to, when you look at images in them sort of narratives, you sort of often think of how did they get to there and where they're going. Whereas with your pictures in that, you weren't giving that. You were just saying, "This is it." For me, you were going, "This is it." Doesn't matter I'm following Preacher's journey. It doesn't matter. There's nothing after that. This is it. This is what it is. There's nothing else. This is what it is, and it's it is abstract. Life is abstract, and I think that come across. And when I started looking at it, once I got that, once I understood the abstractness of it, that sort of this is the sort of point of time of where we are now with that particular place. I sort of got the book.
Yeah.
I think
a lot of people, I don't know this, but I get the impression, because I feel it sometimes. Yeah. You look at it and you're expecting it to be, how can I describe this? Oh, look at how, almost like showing off as a photographer.
Yeah.
Look at these amazing photographs, beautifully decorative and some bit of a happy word, sumptuous image. Yeah. Where these aren't at all. Like you said, I rock up, I vaguely know where I'm going, and in some ways the more flat and boring and mundane and cold it looks, that's kind of how it is. The majority of my experience of driving around England, and I've done a lot of driving around England, and it's almost like, are we looking for those beautiful images, or how can I describe this, are those the unusual pictures, or are the mundane ones the usual? Because you very rarely see them.
Yeah.
You only ever see sort of like, those shafts of light of beautiful, dark, moody skies, etc., etc. Is the fact that these images aren't that, they're equally as valid. That's kind of the norm in my experience. And it's very rare you see a photographer doing that.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for it. If I see a nice bit of light on something, I think, oh, wow, quick, that's it. A shaft of light or some, interesting juxtaposition of something. Whereas in some ways, the more mundane pictures is a more true representation of how we normally see things.
Yeah.
And that's quite unusual for a photographer to do that. And I did have, and I still have, a lot of self-doubt and about whether or not I'm going down the right track with it. But a few people have got it. And that's, to me, once a few people have got it, and kind of like it resonates with them, then I feel kind of less full of self-doubt.
Time and place really does feature in all your work, though, doesn't it? With you've got On This Day. I think even Sleeping Rough, the stuff you did where you photographed, was it the empty places where people slept rough?
That's right, yeah.
I found that very similar in a way to the English journey, in a way of that. You're sort of trying to talk about time as it is there with your work. And
let's not forget, photography is all about time.
But it does feature in your work a lot.
Yeah, I think I've got a big thing about time and about history. All I tend to watch film-wise is historical pieces or things about the future or the past. I think for me that is kind of photography's unique thing. Yeah. Like I said earlier, the Jesus Army. It's only in later years that I realised that at the time I didn't quite know what it was, and now 20 years later is something completely different. You don't realise that until who knows what you shoot today in 10 years' time, what that might turn into and what that might record. Yeah. And I think that's what's really quite fascinating about photography, and particularly documentary photography. You're kind of freezing a period of history that you will never see again. Yeah. And it takes on a new life, completely new life, when you look back at it with nostalgic eyes.
You sort of talking about this, you've done that On This Day. How did that come about? What's that about?
Right, so again, I started, I'm still doing it actually. I'm going to Dresden next week after next. Dresden, where the British bombed. They sort of destroyed Dresden. I'm reading quite a few. I'm almost finished a big, thick, massive book on all the sort of ins and outs of what happened. So it stems from about 5 or 6 years ago, probably more than that actually, maybe 7 years ago. I was on a beach in France with my 1-year-old daughter eating ice creams, and we heard this sort of rumbling. She was a bit older than that because I remember her talking. She talked a little bit. We saw this rumbling of noise on the beach, and I remember her saying, "Daddy, what's that noise? What are those big trucks on the beach?" And I saw these trucks come, and then they were army trucks, Second World War army trucks. And I thought, that's weird. So we wandered down, and I started chatting to them. And I said, "Oh, guys, what are you up to?" And they, "Oh, it's the anniversary of D-Day. We always come here every year on June the 6th. And I went back to the hotel, and I sat there, and I thought, oh my God, on this very piece of land, on this very day, however many years ago it would have been then, something monumental has happened here. I thought there's a project in that. So it sort of started off as me thinking this is a project. So then I approached a professor of modern history, and together, mostly him to be fair, he came up with like a list of events that he thought, I limited it, so it was from 1900 to the present day.
Yeah.
Otherwise it would, and it was going to be in Europe. I thought I could get, if it's the States, it's unmanageable. So for the next 7 years, I probably do about 5, maybe 10 a year. And I go to a place in Europe or the UK on the day that something monumental and world-changing. And I go to the very spot that it happened, on the day that it happened. And then I locate archive material from the original time and combine the images together. At the moment, I've done about 38, 39.
That will take some doing with all the travelling and fitting you in with your schedules and stuff.
I'm hoping to do 52, so that's like 52 weeks. The thing is with it is, for example, I had it all planned to photograph the place where Dolly the sheep was born in Edinburgh, which is next Thursday, but they've refused entry. I think it's probably to do with genetics, engineering or something.
Yeah.
And they fobbed me off by saying the farm's no longer there, which I know is not actually true because it is. There's something still there, but they don't want me. I tried last year and they said no. So I basically tried again this year, thinking they might have forgotten. But no luck. The interesting thing is some places are really, really open to it. Like I found the room where they discovered DNA, and a really lovely sort of lady at the Cambridge University said, I think there's a professor somewhere who's retired. He might know. Here's his email. So I emailed this professor.
Yeah.
And he comes back to me and says, oh yes, I remember what room it was. Speak to, Marjorie in this place and say I sent you. So I, contacted I said, Professor Brian Griffin, or whatever his name is, not Brian Griffin. Professor Griffin has said I should. Oh yes, love, yes, I know about you. Come in anytime you like. It's room 17 on the left corridor. And I walk in and it's a store cupboard. Wow. And I just thought, genius, absolutely genius. The place where they discovered the helix of DNA is now full of crap. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's still little bits of marking. If you look at the image, you can see markings on the wall where they must have done stuff on the wall. And there's like books and bits of rubbish everywhere. But some places are really, really like, oh no, sorry, can't come in, like Concord, but like the place where Concord was built, they weren't having any of it. Like the Dresden one, again, they were really helpful. But unfortunately, the place where the first Pathfinder bombs were put is playing a football ground.
Yeah.
And I've contacted the football ground, but it's actually being rebuilt. But the nice woman at the football club said, you can still get in there are still ways of getting in. So I think I could still get in, but it's like a building site. I read that as her saying, I can't let you in, but there are ways you can get in if you want to,
You're also using diptych artifact collects with your pictures as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that doing with the images? Is that sort of validating?
I think it might say what you're saying is connecting the sort of past and present, isn't it? It's almost like a metaphor for connecting it all up. Because I found when you show the images out of context, again, they're kind of not epic. Some of them, like, they're a store cupboard, yeah? But when you see the context of what that store cupboard is about, there's no fancy photography or anything. I felt like it needed something to draw you, to connect it, to make it, to give the viewer a bit more information. Yeah. Otherwise, it sort of doesn't mean very much.
And you did this with the English Journey as well?
Yeah.
How did you get that? That was like a charity shop.
Yeah, it was mostly every place I went to, I went hunting around charity shops. And like the On This Day stuff, a lot of that is research, and then I have to go through the whole rigmarole of getting permission to use it, which takes up a lot of time and actually costs money as well a lot of the time. Sometimes not a huge amount. You can usually, if you explain to them what you're doing and you're saying to them, it's not going to be used out of context and it's not going to be used commercially, you can usually get it for like a reduced rate. But you have to do your due diligence, because sometimes you find you've got to try and trace who owns it a lot of the time. Does that make sense? So I've almost become like a picture researcher as well, which I actually quite enjoy, if I'm honest. I find tracking down, images and who owns them and stuff, I quite enjoy it.
Has any of that style moved into the Grass project?
If I'm honest with you, the archive stuff
is better than the actual photography at the moment. I'm looking at it at the moment. I've got a big metal thing on my wall, and I've got maybe 20 archive pictures that I've found, and my letter from the Queen saying that I can't photograph her grass. And the actual images I've got are a little bit, I don't know. I've only just started it, so who knows where it might go.
How have you balanced all of this with earning a living? You do a lot of portraits, you do a lot of covers for the Times.
I do a bit of that, and I do quite a lot of work for charities, and I do a lot of stuff for design agencies, like annual reports and stuff. If I'm really honest, without that commercial work, I wouldn't be able to do any of the other stuff. And I'd like to be in a position where it's always a really fine balance.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you wish you had more commercial work coming in because you're a bit low on cash, and then sometimes, not as often as I'd like, you have way too much commercial work and you think, I really want to do something interesting. I want to do something for myself, you know? So it's like that constant, you know, up and down. If I'm honest now, it's January, isn't it? So I've been quite quiet. I've hardly worked in January, so I'm a little bit keen to get a bit of commercial work in to sort of get the coffers up. But yeah, I think all photographers have this, not all photographers, I'm sure there's a lot of photographers out there that have this kind of constant battle with themselves. That fight between art and commerce. Have I got enough money to be able to go and do some more grass pictures? You know, or do I need to get some more money in?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because your portrait style editorially for the magazines very much differs from your editorial style in books.
Yeah, I think partly because editorial magazines want a particular type of picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a certain, you know, I'm pretty sure if I went to, you know, a Times magazine or a Guardian magazine job and went a little bit kind of, shot it on my 5.4 of blankness, they'd go, this is not what we wanted. We wanted a nice, you know, nicely lit, well-crafted image. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're the only photographer I know who's had the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. That must have been really a big wow in your head when, you know.
Again, completely no idea. I had no idea.
Well, you did the Killers as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
You shot the Killers for the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. I mean, did you not think, wow?
No, I didn't, because if I'm really honest, I didn't. I've heard of the Killers, right? Not my cup of tea, to be honest. Not really a big fan of the Killers, and it wasn't a particularly pleasant experience. I won't say any more. Yeah,
that's fine.
But photographing the Killers wasn't a career highlight, if I'm honest. It was a little bit stressful. They were doing a sort of like photo junket at Holborn Studios, so they'd hired every studio out, and we were last on the list. So by the time the Killers had got to the Studio 7, yeah.
Had you already been commissioned by Rolling Stone?
No, it was actually shot for someone else, and Rolling Stone bought it off me.
Right.
So it was originally shot for the Times, yeah. And then the Times used a really small image. They didn't even run it very big. They ran just a shot of Brandon, is it Brandon? Lead singer. Like an interview with, you know, do you know when they used to sort of ask people questions? You know, when they asked, 10 questions about your life?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Rolling Stone came on to me and said, can we see the set? So I sent them the set and they used it on the cover. But yeah, so when they arrived to Studio 7, I'd been waiting there. I think they came at 4 o'clock. I was told my slot was 10 o'clock. I think they put it in sort of order of important.
Yeah.
I think GQ went first and then it went down the hierarchy. And then the Times magazine got it last. They were not in. It was awful. I think I'm going to say something quite controversial here. I think there's always this talk about portrait photographer and this notion that it's this collaboration between the viewer and the photographer, and I extract their personality out. I just don't buy that at all. Yeah. My experience is it's usually, right, you've got 5 minutes, yeah? They don't really want to be here. They'll give you what they want. They'll give you a look, and you've got to do your damn bestest to get that look and as much as you can get out of it before they go, have you got enough? Have you got enough? Can we? Are you almost finished? Are you almost finished? That doesn't always happen, to be fair. Some people usually give you, you always feel a bit embarrassed that you've kept them for too long.
Yeah.
But you think you've obviously got better things to do than sat here with me. But my experience a lot of the time with particularly sort of high-end celebrities is literally 5 to 7 minutes. David Hockney was 5 minutes 45 seconds from start to finish. Anyway, that's just my thought.
I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've experienced it. I've seen it. Normally, it's happened to me in the corporate world. Although I have had a few odd celeb types, but normally in their big CEO side, where big corporations, where I've seen it. I've actually seen. I assisted Peter Marlowe once, where we'd set up 2 different shots for American Scientific magazine for the head of the Guardian Royal, and we'd set up a film, a black and white shot and a tranny shot, and Peter just took one frame, and he got up and walked out. He said, that's all you need. That was it. So I've seen it. I haven't done as much as you of like that one-to-one setup in the studio at all. That's not been my sort of venture in it. Were you a photojournalist in the 90s then?
I don't know what I was in the 90s. I was still doing my little personal projects, and I did get quite a lot of it's all words, isn't it? I got a lot of reportage work off, either the Saturday or the Sunday Times magazine. I was sort of like, that was what I was known of. And I think in the 90s, early 2000s, it was all about sort of almost being a specialist, wasn't it? It was like, John's good at doing reportage stuff. Well, let's use John because we know we're going to get something usable. And then that sort of started going a little bit out of fashion in sort of early 2000s. It started going a little bit, And then I started thinking, I've got to get money, I need to be able to do portraiture. So I started doing a bit more, offering up, I can do a portrait, I can do portraits. And then I suddenly started doing more portraiture. And like now, if I'm really honest, reportage is very rare that you get a reportage job. It's mostly portrait, isn't it? I'm sure you're the same. It's like, I think it's partly to do with budgets and partly to do with fashion. Somebody once said to me, on Sunday morning, you don't want to open the magazine and see pictures of people down on their luck next to your adverts for your posh toaster. Do you know what I mean? You want to see aspirational lifestyle. You want to see, how the beautiful people live, And I think so. I continue to be commercially viable. I kind of had to start taking portraits. If I'm honest, I'm not particularly comfortable being a portrait photographer. I don't find it comes easy to me.
I don't think many photographers do.
I struggle. I find that one-to-one scenario kind of quite daunting. Whereas if you put me in a situation where I can hang out and sort of, spend time and just relax and just let it flow, I feel much more comfortable and I feel much more motivated. As in, I come home thinking, wow, that was so exciting. I really enjoyed that.
Do you think a lot of that comes because it's on other people's terms? I think if you're doing a sort of editorial portrait for yourself, it's a little bit more open.
I think that's true. I'm a natural introvert. Yeah. I'm naturally not particularly good at sort of like...
You're not in control either.
Yeah, and I'm not particularly good at sort of small talk. If you were initially an introvert, it probably makes you more of an introvert when you're not working, because your experience with people is usually when you have to photograph them. So when you're not photographing them, you haven't learned how to sort of do small talk. Does that make sense?
It does. So who are you now then? What are you now? Who do you see? I know you're mentoring and you're doing part-time lecturing at universities and you've got the new mentoring scheme on your website. Yeah. Who are you now? You've seen your evolution, is that the word? You've seen how you've evolved?
I think I'm the same. I'm exactly the same. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable in myself, a little bit more confident. The self-doubt still appears, but not as often. I think that's because I've sort of learned to sort of take my time and not release anything until I'm completely sure that I'm happy with it. I think I'm a lot calmer. I'm not as arrogant. I'd like to think I'm not as arrogant. Hopefully not. I'm just generally a more kind of not thoughtful, a more kind of solid human from just experience and growing older. You just know when but I still think at the core I'm still the same. Hopefully people who've met me or people who've been photographed me have come away thinking it was a fair transaction. It was, the guy was, John hasn't taken from me. He's been quite open. It's been a two-way transaction, if that makes sense.
Which two photographers have been the biggest influence in your life?
Good question. With their work, it has to be a photographer called Mishka Henna, who's based up in Manchester. He sort of came from the same sort of direction as me initially, and then kind of went off at a junction, turned right, and has been doing some really fascinating work with reappropriating images and using Google Earth, and I don't think he even uses a camera anymore. It's all about the use of imagery in society and how he sort of plays with the whole thing. And photographer wise, I know it's really old fashioned, and Bill Brandt still gets me every time I look at it.
Yeah.
I know there's just something about everything I hear or read or see by him. I know it's quite dated now, but for the 1930s, and you look at his work and you think he invented the cliche. You know, that sort of black and white reportage documentary image. I know some of his were like, you know, he posed some of it and it was, you know, but there's something about them that you think that is where it all started. And I think it reverses back to where our conversation started, where I found that book at the school library, and that was the moment I realised that there was more to this. These feelings of taking pictures that I found really fascinating. People were doing it like for real, you know. And there's a book in the school library, you know.
Yeah.
So I kind of like tip my hat to him and think, thank you, Bill. You started me off. I was sort of looking as a sort of grandfather figure. Not that I've ever met him, or you know, or know very much about him on a personal level. There's something about him that I sort of look as a great grandfather figure that I sort of think it was you who started me on this journey, and I thank you for that.
Wasn't there a connection between Brandt and Priestley in the Bolton?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, because Brandt did a lot of his stuff in the north, didn't he, of the miners and stuff, at the same time as Priestley was writing his book. And I think there might have been some article somewhere where Brandt did the pictures and Priestley, because Priestley did quite a lot of journalism. He wrote a lot of journalism.
But there was the whole group of them, wasn't it? There was Spender, and I'm sure Brandt was in there, and off the top of my head I can't remember the other guys.
Yeah, there is another guy as well, yeah.
I have covered it on the channel. I covered it on the channel.
George Orwell was around at the same time, wasn't he? They were all kind of, It
was a sort of an amazing period for journalism, and
it was almost like the birth as documentary as we know it.
Absolutely. The Spender book is just beautiful. I'm fascinated with that book and that whole period.
And I think there's still a place for it. But I think it needs to develop and sort of become it needs to be modernised.
Yeah,
and I'd like to think that we're all still doing it with our own, as David Hockney says, we're all adding our own glitter to it, you know. It's still the idea is still the same, that you don't need to fabricate stuff. You don't need to change very much. Maybe the way you deliver it and the way you disseminate it can change. But the core message and the core concept is you don't need to change anything. It's already there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with the English journey, that resonated with me because of Priestley and because I was fascinated with the Bolton Blackpool's northern images of the time and the association. So for me, when I was looking at that, I sort of got your story idea straight away. And just interesting, you know, you talk about time and stuff. How do you think in 70, 80 years people will look back at your work in terms of your interpretations of time? And how do you think we'll be looked at? And how do you think?
That's a good question. I'd be horrified to think how, if any of it still exists.
Because it's all passed on, isn't it?
There'll be a massive internet fire and the whole lot would be destroyed. You know, one big internet landfill.
Yes, but I you know, I think things they go around in circles, and you can see how the resurgence of print's come back with digital printing and stuff. So yes, we will be caught up in a digital landscape, but there are always ways that things come full circle, and people are interested in history. It'll be interesting to see what's picked up in 90 years, and it'd be interesting to see how Priestley's interpreted then. Because I bet there's a photographer in 100 years maybe doing your journey again. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? So, what photography book would you take you with you on a desert island? What's that book you go to? When you need some inspiration, what is that one book?
I think a book that I've had probably for 10 or 15 years is, he's not even a photographer. I think he's a sort of performance artist, and he's called, let me see if I can never pronounce this correctly. It's called Tehching Shui, which is Tehching, Tehching, and his surname is Hsieh. He's Korean, and the book is hard to explain. Each piece that he does is extreme time play. Okay, so for example, the opening piece he did, he got a lawyer to sign an affidavit that what he was doing was true and honest. Yeah, he locked himself in a room with only one friend who had a key, and he photographed a clocking in, clocking out on a 16mm camera. So he had a 16mm camera in the room, and each day he took one frame, and the first 20 pages are him one day photographed, and you see his hair growing and his beard growing. It's basically it's called the 1 year performance between 1981 and 1982.
You send some links for that.
Yeah,
and some of the other stuff the other people you've mentioned,
yeah.
I'll try and put the links.
He did another one where him and his artist friend tied themselves together for a year.
Yeah.
And I just think that kind of like total commitment and
time,
playing with time,
and
understanding time, and like playing, you know, this book is, I would imagine it's out of print now, but it was an exhibition that I saw in Manchester years, and you know, when I was living up there, and it's a book that I always go back to. I've just found something inside it. Oh, there's a print inside. Yeah. So this is a book. Yeah, I would say it was my favourite.
Yeah.
Purely because there's so much going on. Every time you look at it, you find something else that he's done in it. It's quite big. It's a big, thick. Yeah. It's like huge.
Well, speaking of time.
Yeah.
I've had a lovely time. It's tea time. I've had a lovely time listening to you, John, and it's just been great having you. It's my very first podcast, and
always a pleasure.
Well, I listen back and listen to all my mistakes, and you know, keep trying to improving. And well, it was fascinating, and I hope people can learn something about you, just about, you know, being a photographer. You're not that much different to each other. You know, it's all swings and roundabouts. It's all life learning, and you learn off each other, and it's better over a few beers sometimes. And so thank you, and it's been a real pleasure,
no
mate.
Worries.
And what I'll do is I'll catch up with you at some point when you're doing really Into the Grass project, and see how you're developing, and we'll jump back in on it at some point and get an update on you, and take it from there.
Lovely. Have a nice one, mate.
Have a great day, and I'll catch up with you soon, John.